What's going on, everyone? So welcome to my latest video. So a little bit of background. In 2014, towards the end of said year, I decided to do my top 250 favorite films of all time. And I actually do have that list. I will put the link down below in the description. But recently I decided to say, you know what? I want to redo said list. So I already did my top 25 favorite films of all time. I did release that in early 2021. And then I also did my top 26 to top 100 favorite films of all time in 2023. And towards the end of said year, I decided that I was going to focus on 2024 being the year that I'm going to do my top 101 to top 250 favorite films of all time. Now, I did recently release, the last couple months, my top 151 to top 200 and my top 201 to 250. This time around, you clicked on the video, so you know it. This time around, I'm doing my top 101 to 150 favorite films of all time. Now, it goes without saying, but my list is going to be different from yours, and that's what's great about these type of lists, as well as just film in general. It is an art form, therefore it is subjective, so I am curious to see what your list is looking like. But and also, it goes without saying, but film is something that changes over time. It's just like friendships or relationships in general. Things do change over time. So this list, it might change in a year or two. It might change in a month or two. It really just depends. I mean, that's what's great about doing these type of lists. Like, you can look at my top 250 from a decade ago and see how much has changed in 10 years. So 10 years from now in 2034, maybe I'll do this video again. And honestly, I'm looking forward to doing that because that's what's great. It's almost like a time capsule. So all that exposition aside, guys, I'm going to be starting with my number 150, and then I will be ending at my 101. So sit back, get some popcorn, and enjoy. And also, don't forget to put your list down below in the comment section. But guys, enough exposition. Let's get started. So kicking things off with my number 150, we have Ace in the Hole. Great Billy Wilder film. I really, really like this film. This was a blind buy, and one of the best blind buys I've gotten, honestly. And what's really great about this film is you can see that it's almost set the template for what we would see later on in 2014 with Nightcrawler. Kirk Douglas is fantastic in this film. Really, really good film. Highly recommend it. One of the best films of the 1950s. And also way ahead of its time. Like, it's dealing with seedy characters during the Heist Code era. So really, really good stuff. Love this film. That's my number 150. Next up, my number 149, we have Vertigo. So Vertigo is a film that I am not going to lie. I wanted to put in my top 100 favorite films of all time, but I kept putting it off because the last 15 minutes, there's a scene where they basically have an exposition dump where we as audience members are therefore ahead of the main character. And it's just very frustrating. I'm still to this day, why did you do that? Because besides that scene of us being ahead of the lead character, it is almost a flawless film. It is an incredible film. I love the cinematography. I love the score. The characters are fascinating. It's, again, similar to Ace in the Hole. It's dealing with morally gray characters during the Heist Code era, and it is fantastic. Again, it's one of those films that I want to say is so close to being perfect, and I would love to say it's perfect, but again, towards the end when they have that scene where we're ahead of the lead character, it's very frustrating. That's why you're seeing my reaction right now. But again, I still love this film, and that's why it is my number 149. Next up, my number 148, we have The Seventh Seal. Yes, I love this film. If you've seen my film, my short film, Mortality, yes, I did pay heavily homage to this film because I think this is one of the best depictions of religion, personally. It's just a really, really good film. If you haven't gotten into international cinema just yet, highly recommend you watch this film. It is one of the best religious dramas, and that is why it is my number 148. Next up, my number 147, we have Sunset Boulevard. Another Billy Wilder film, another gem of a script, and yeah, the characters here are fascinating. It's got some of the best quotes of all time, and it's just one of the best Hollywood films of all time. So yeah, if you've been sleeping on this film, highly recommend it. So that was my number 147. Next up, my number 146, this was another Criterion blind buy, and that is High and Low. Yes, an incredible film. As of the filming of this video, which is September 28th, 2024, High and Low might be my favorite Kurosawa film. I love this film. I think it is incredible. The black and white cinematography, the symbolism of the camera angles and everything are just fantastic. Love the characters. It's just a very well-crafted film. I'm looking forward to rewatching this film many more times, and that's why I'm glad that I blind bought this, because it's really good. That was my number 146. Next up, my number 145. Yes, we're going on a roll here with noirs. And we have Lara. This one seems to be under the radar from a lot of people, unfortunately. But It's a really, really good film. Like, it is one of the best noirs, personally. And it's also really nice because it's under 90 minutes, but it's a really good mystery. And even if you discover the mystery, like, beforehand, the characters are fascinating and it's very well shot. So, one of my favorite films from the time period and just film noirs in general, and that's why I have it on this list. Next up, another Hitchcock film. We have my number 144. We have Rear Window. Rear Window is excellent. At one point, it was in my top 25 favorite films of all time, and it's not quite there anymore, mostly because the last, 5 minutes during the climax, there's some weird FPS that's going on, but for the most part, it's a great film. I mean, I love the characters, I love the visual storytelling. It's just a really, really well put together film. This and Vertigo are two films that are just so close to being perfect that it's almost kind of frustrating, but at the same time, they're two films that are excellent establishments in regards to the thriller genre. I mean, Rear Window and Vertigo, they're excellent. Psycho is also great, but that was in my top 100 favorite films of all time. I also recommend getting that collection because they shine on 4K. So that was my number 144. Next up, my number 143, we have Mary and Max, an animated claymation type style film that is really well done. It's very depressing though, so go into it knowing that, but it's really good. I think it handles mental health in particular in a very fascinating and realistic way. It's very grounded, and it's just a very well crafted film. If you've been sleeping on this film, highly recommend it. One of my favorite animated films of all time. So that was my number 143. Next up, my number 142, we have Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. So I know that this film came out a year or two ago, but hear me out. I think it's a great film. It definitely is worthy of Best Picture. It was my number 2 favorite film of 2023. 2022, my apologies. But it's just a great film. Like, it is very well crafted. It's able to combine genres seamlessly. And it's also got a heart to it. I mean, this is a film that, when I recently saw it a year or so ago, made me cry. It's just a very effective film. And I just think that it's a film that can really get across to a lot of different people because of just how powerful it is. So if you've been sleeping on this film, highly recommend it. That was my number 142. Next up, my number 141, we have Isle of Dogs, a film that in 2018, when I first saw it, I loved it, saw it twice in theaters, and I've seen it several times since then, but what's great is the most recent time that I saw it, which was about a year ago, I became a dog owner a couple years ago. So as a dog owner now, it's one of those films that I just find myself to love even more and appreciate, because now that I have a dog, it's like, oh yeah, that's realistic. Like, I love these little things. But another claymation film, another hit from Wes Anderson, and just an overall incredible film. And yeah, that's why I have it as my number 141. Next up, my number 140, we have Failsafe. So Failsafe is a blind buy that I got in, I think it was January of this year. And it was one of those films that I didn't really hear about. But when I read the premise and I saw who it was directed by, Sidney Lumet, who also directed Dog Day Afternoon, 12 Angry Men, among many other films, I said to myself, you know what? I'm going to blind buy this. And I'm glad that I did, because it has one of the most powerful endings that I've seen that legit made my stomach turn in the best of ways. It's a very thought-provoking film that, even though, again, I saw it earlier this year in January, February, all these months later, I'm still thinking about it, and I still can't get over just how tense and white knuckle it is. It's an incredible film. If you've been sleeping on it, it is one of the best films of the 1960s, and I'm so glad that I own this, because I look forward to rewatching it many more times over, and that's why it's my number 140. Next up, my number 139, one of my favorite animated films of all time, we have Toy Story 3. Yes, it is an emotional film. Yes, they easily could have ended the franchise here, although I will say I do quite like Toy Story 4, but the argument of this, should have been the end of the franchise is one that I can validate, because this is a fantastic film. It feels like a finality to the franchise, and at the same time, the animation is gorgeous, the characters are fully realized, and I love how, similar to Everything Ever All at Once, it's a blending of genres that's seamlessly done. Just a very well-crafted animated film that is able to cater to people of all ages, and that's one of the powers of animation as an art form. So, love this film, and that's why it's my number 139. Next up, my number 138, we have Straw Dogs. This film doesn't seem to get talked about that much in regards to 1970s cinema, but holy cow, it's an incredible film. A film like Home Alone or Skyfall are two films that owe a lot to this film. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Whether you've seen this film or not, you're probably like, wait, what? Think about the third act of Home Alone and Skyfall, and think about the third act of this film. Yeah, it all started with Straw Dogs. But also what's great about Straw Dogs is it's an interesting take on gender identity. Not only just that, but also just sexuality, sexism, and also masculinity. It's one of those films that is combining all these different themes in a very enriching way. It's a build up to a final act that I think is very much so earned, but the director also really challenges audience members, and that's one of the powers of cinema. It's not necessarily going to be for everyone because of how it's paced, but I found this film to be quite effective, and it's one of Dustin Hoffman's finest performances, and love this film. Highly recommend it, especially on Criterion Blu-ray. So that was my number 138. Next up, my number 137. This is one that I don't quite own just yet because I'm not sure if I'm going to wait until it hits 4K or if I'm just going to bite the bullet and actually pick it up on Blu-ray, and that is Annie Hall. Annie Hall, I'm just going to say right now, it is one of the most well-deserved Best Picture winners, and I'm saying that as someone that, yes, I did quite like Star Wars when it came out, but it's one of those films that I think Annie Hall gets even better upon rewatching. When I saw it recently, I was like, wow, this is one of the best romantic comedies. It's got an incredible script. I love the humor. The humor is just really well done. And I think the performances, the cinematography, everything is just firing all cylinders. And yeah, it's a very, very effective film. And that's why I have it on this list at number 137. Next up, my number 136, this is Carol, a film that when I saw in 2015 on Christmas Day, I said to myself that I would probably never watch it again, but lo and behold, I've seen it now probably a half a dozen times since then. I love Carol. It's a film that I keep coming back to. It is one of the best films that, you can watch around Christmas time. It is depressing for sure, but it is very accurate to the time period, and Todd Haynes' directing is so sensitive, and I also love Cate Blanchett's performance in Rooney Mara. Just a really well done film. Not for everyone because of not only the subject matter, unfortunately, but also just because of how depressing it is. But if you are in the mood for a depressing Christmas-type film, this is the one to watch. It's very well done, and that's why I have it on this list at my number 136. Next up, my number 135. This is another romance that is definitely not on the light side, which is, one of the things that I like about Annie Hall is that it actually kind of breaks the trend a little bit in regards to the romances that I usually am geared towards. But we have my number 135 is Before Midnight. Sorry, I almost said Before Sunrise, but one of the things about this trilogy that's great is that the first two entries are fantastic, but the third one I think is a little bit better. It's more effective in regards to the drama that's at hand. The slice of life storytelling in all three do work quite well, but I think Before Midnight really takes things to the next level. And honestly, as I'm filming this video, it is my favorite Richard Linklater film. I think it's a very fantastic film, and Ethan Hawke delivers an incredible performance, as does Julie Delpy. One of the best films of 2013, and yeah, I'm so glad that I own this trilogy, in particular Before Midnight. So that was my number 135. Next up, my number 134. This was a Criterion Blind Buy, and we have All That Jazz. Yes, this is great. This is a great film. It is one of the best musicals of all time. It is also just one of the best dramas of all time. It's got kinetic editing. This film I have to thank quite a bit because without this film, we probably wouldn't have gotten Birdman or The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance, which, as many of you know, is one of my favorite films of all time. So I owe this film a lot. I think it's an incredible film. It is a feat for filmmaking and just a film that, to this day, I love, and I'm glad that I own it on Blu-ray so that way I can rewatch it many more times. So if you've been sleeping on All That Jazz, highly recommend it. One of my favorite films. That was my number 134. Next up, this is another film that owes a lot to All That Jazz, and we have Black Swan. Yes, Darren Aronofsky owes a lot to All That Jazz, but he also owes a lot to, of course, Perfect Blue. Yes, I think Black Swan's great. One of my favorite films from 2010. Natalie Portman won a well-deserved Oscar. Just a film that is working on all fronts from a drama to a horror, and just also, again, delivers one of Natalie Portman's, if not her best performance. Love the score, love the ending. I just think it works on all fronts, and that's why I have it on this list. Next up, that was my number 133. My number 132, we have Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? What a film. It is very depressing. It is very anxiety-inducing. But let me just say this. If you're in the mood for a film that has some of the best dialogue that you will hear, as well as some of the best performances that you will hear, experience this film. It is one of a kind. It is really, really good. But again, it is so draining. Like, after spending time with these characters, you can't help but say, oh my goodness, like I need a breather. I need some alone time. I need to be around something that's not talking and that, it's just like white noise, so to speak. Because this film, it's like, it is constant bombardment of just some of the most vile, hateful things that you'll hear. But it's so well done. I can't get enough of this film. But again, you just have to be in the right mindset and know that you are about to experience something quite draining. But that's one of the great things about filmmaking, is that you can experience all different emotions in this medium. And one of them is being drained by watching Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Speaking of being drained, my number 131 is a film that's really grown on me. It's a film that I thought was solid when I saw it in theaters in 2017. Decided to rewatch it when The Green Knight came out and ended up loving it, and then rewatched it recently and cried. And we have A Ghost Story. Yes, I love A Ghost Story. I am team A Ghost Story. I know that it's one of those films that some people find to be utterly boring, and then other people, really find it to be meditative, and just something that they can really, grab onto. And I honestly think that if you've ever dealt with depression in particular, you can definitely relate to this film, and you'll definitely be able to understand the lead character and her journey that she goes on. And it's one of those things, when this film came out, I wasn't as in tune to my feelings that I am now. So when I watched the film, like when I rewatched it in 2021, I was really able to grasp the full concept of this film. And then now, especially being even more in tune to my feelings, I am all on board with The Ghost Story, with what it's trying to get across. And I just think it's such an effective film that, again, yes, it's depressing. Yes, it is a film that is slow burning, but it is one of the best that's dealing with both, and just one of A24's finest films. So I highly recommend A Ghost Story. That's why I have it as my number 131. Next up, my number 130, we have Traffic. Traffic is my favorite Steven Soderbergh film. This is an incredible film. I know Breaking Bad usually gets credit for having it where, New Mexico has the yellow color palette, but in actuality, Traffic is the film that started that. In fact, Traffic has many scenes that I wouldn't be surprised if the creator of Breaking Bad, Vince Gilligan, said that he was heavily inspired by Traffic, because there were several scenes that were in Breaking Bad. Of course, this came first, so that's what I'm saying. Like, I think Breaking Bad owes a lot to this film, and Breaking Bad is one of my favorite TV shows of all time. And Traffic, I just think it's a complex film, and it seems to get better with each viewing. I really love the vignettes of where different people are across the world is matched by a different color palette, and I think it's very effective. But I also just love how complex these characters are. I can definitely see why Steven Soderbergh won Best Director at the Oscars for this film, because it is a multi-layered film that only seems to get better. I've heard some people say that it hasn't aged well, and I highly disagree with it. Traffic is an incredible film, and I'm so glad that I own it on Blu-ray. That was my number 130. My number 129, this is Eastern Promises, one of my favorite gangster films, one of my favorite David Cronenberg films, and a film that just seems to get better with each viewing. I think that it is dealing with a lot of complex themes, but more so, it's also dealing with a lot of just accuracy with this in particular mob. I think the Russian mob just doesn't really get a lot of depiction on the big screen, and to see that Stephen Knight, the writer of this film, went into, a lot of background of this and how realistic it is, it really showcases it, because it's a film that just feels very grounded, and I think that Cronenberg in particular was a perfect choice for this type of material. And it's just a film that I keep coming back to, and I just can't get enough of it. It's a very, very morally complex film, and as many of you probably know, if you've been watching, this series for a while now, I'm someone that loves those type of films, and that's why I have 129 being Eastern Promises. Next up, my number 128, we have The Witch. So yeah, I do own The Witch on 4K, but the 4K unfortunately did not come with a slipcase, and I did used to own this on Blu-ray, so I just put the Blu-ray slipcase on the 4K. But yeah, anyways, The Witch, I loved this film. I think it's incredible. I think that it really is a nice calling card for Robert Eggers. Like, this was the first film of his that I saw, and as well as Anya Taylor-Joy. Like, it's a film that, for me, established both of those individuals as, hey, I am going to watch whatever they're in forever. In particular, Anya Taylor-Joy. She delivers a masterclass performance. And it's just a film that is really good at building and building and building to that final act. It's a film that might not necessarily work for everyone, but for me, I think the horror works really well. And even if you don't think it's quote-unquote scary, it is an effective period piece. And I think it does a really good job of depicting the time period in a very effective way. So, love The Witch, and that's why it's my number 128. Next up, my number 127. This is a film that, between this and Traffic, it's a very difficult choice for me to pick which of these I prefer, but I decided to go with this film being slightly above Traffic, and that is my number 127, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. I love this film. I think that it's funny because when I first saw it, I thought it was terrible. In fact, I remember watching it with my parents and shutting it off. But all these years later, I decided to revisit it in 2019, and I was just like, why did I hate this film? This is great. And I've seen it a couple of times since, and it just seems to get better with each viewing, and I think that the emotions between the characters are just something that's very palpable. The martial arts style action is really good. It's just a film that is very stylish, and I think it's very effective at building to the story's conclusion. So I love this film. It's one of my favorite action films of all time, and that's why I have it as my number 127. Next up, my number 126. This is a film that hopefully gets a 4K at some time, because I know that this Blu-ray has been DNR'd, unfortunately, meaning that the film grain's been stripped. So I've never actually seen this film the way it's meant to look, which is a shame, but hopefully that changes. Please change that, New Line Cinema. My number 126 is A History of Violence. Yeah, I love this film. Cronenberg was the perfect director for this, and similar to how Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and Traffic, they're two films that were 2000 Best Picture nominees that I have a difficult time choosing which over another. It's similar to A History of Violence and Eastern Promises. Like, these are two gangster films that Cronenberg did, and I think that both of them are great. Like, they are fantastic, and they're pretty much neck and neck. I think A History of Violence, what makes it elevated a little bit more is that there is it's a very complex film that if you go into it knowing absolutely nothing, you are going to be flabbergasted with what happens at the end of Act 1. It's one of those experiences that I'll never forget when I first saw it, because I didn't know anything about it, but it's just one of those films that I keep coming back to show my friends and see their reactions to it, and I love it. It's one of those things that I love having movie nights for this movie, because it's a very effective film, and it's also a taut, I think, 96 minutes long, so it's really good. Love this film, and that's why it's my number 126. Next up, number 125, we have Watchmen. In particular, the director's cut. This is a film that the first time I saw it in 2014, I thought it was okay, but I just couldn't get it out of my head with the imagery that's on screen. And the more I've revisited it, the more I've loved it. And at this point, I do think it's a masterpiece of the superhero genre. I really don't know if this is a film that's going to get topped anytime soon. Although something like Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse does come pretty close. But the complexity of this film is just something that, to this day, I love peeling back the different layers. And I also think that the stylization that Zack Snyder really went for is something that is so effective. This is one of the finest Blu-rays, also, I wanted to mention, but it's also got an ending that really hits hard, and it's a film that I just keep coming back to, and I think that even at, 3 hours and 6 minutes, it's still a film that I find myself to be engrossed by, and I think the combination of noir with superhero is so effective in this film. So, love Watchmen, and that's why it's my number 125. Next up, my number 124, this is a film that I mentioned earlier when I was talking about Ace in the Hole, and that is Nightcrawler. Yes, Nightcrawler owes a lot to Ace in the Hole, but I gotta say, Nightcrawler is an effective film. Jake Gyllenhaal delivers one of, if not his best performances. It's got an ending that really hits hard. And I also just love how LA in general just feels like a character in itself. And I also think that the story itself is something that we don't really see too much of, but I think that it does a really good job of dissecting media and just also violence in general. It's a character journey that might not necessarily be for everyone, because it is a hard to watch experience, but it is a film that if you love filmmaking, you gotta watch it. It's really, really good. And that's why I have it as my number 124. Speaking of hard to watch, this is a film that's way harder to watch than Nightcrawler, and that is my number 123, The Skin I Live In. Yeah, go into this film knowing as little as possible. All I will say is this: it is not for everyone. It is a film that it might turn your stomach in some instances, but I love how complex this revenge film is. It is not everything that what might seem on just a glance. Like, when you read the premise, you wouldn't necessarily think that this film goes into those moral ambiguous type of themes, but it does. And that's one of the reasons why I keep coming back to this film, because I just think that it is such an effective film that really puts you into the perspective of these characters and to where you understand everyone's viewpoint, but you also feel really complicated in regards to with what's going on. And at some point, also feel complicit with what's going on. And that's also something I think is really effective with the revenge film genre. And this film definitely is one of the best of the genre. If you've been sleeping on this film, highly recommend it. It is one of the best of the 2010s. That's why I have it all on my 123. Next up, my number 122. This is a film that, as one person on my Letterboxd commented on my review, finding this film on 4K could make a film in itself because of just how hard it was to find. And some of you probably guessed it. My number 122, Lawrence of Arabia. So what a journey What a journey. I'm so glad that I own this up on 4K. But let me just say, I saw this on DVD, I saw this on Blu-ray, and I saw this on 4K. And on 4K, it's one of the best looking of all time. Like, no question about that. But it's not even just the fact that it's a beautiful looking and sounding film. It's also one of those films that at almost 4 hours long, yes, you might feel it the first time you watch it, but the more you watch it, the less you feel the length and the more just engulfed you are with the character's journey and also just the filmmaking at hand. It's one of those films that if you are taking a film class and they're not showing this in film class, something is probably wrong, because this is one of those films that can be analyzed to death because of just how effective it is. One of the best films in the 1960s, and that's why I have it as my number 122. Although I will say that it's not a film that I come back to a lot. It is still an effective film nonetheless. So that's my number 122. Next up, my number 121, we have Whiplash. So Whiplash is a film that I saw in theaters in 2014, and I will never forget that experience in theaters, because it was just like, wow. And it's one of those films that just gets better over time. And recently I actually saw it when it was re-released in theaters, and it's just as an effective experience. Like, it's one of those things where even if you don't necessarily like music, you can really get behind this character's journey. It's so good, and I highly recommend that if you've been sleeping on this film, please watch Whiplash. It's an incredible film that everyone should experience. It is like Full Metal Jacket mixed with like a music drama, and it's so good. Highly recommend it. And yeah, that's why it's my number 121. Next up, my number 120, we have Uncut Gems. Adam Sandler delivers an incredible performance. This is the Safdie brothers at their absolute high. The anxiety-inducing editing style and dialogue is just perfection. It's just an overall experience that is unlike anything you will experience, especially in modern-day cinema. I love this film. I think that it might not necessarily be for everyone because it is a character study of someone that is arguably a terrible individual, but it's nonetheless still a very thrilling experience that I would highly recommend experiencing at least once. For me, I've rewatched it multiple times, and it gets better with each viewing. Love Uncut Gems. That's why it's my number 120. Next up, my number 119. This is a film that does an excellent job of really dissecting a dysfunctional family, and as someone that, you know, kind of is in one, I can definitely relate to this film. And what's funny is this film wasn't even on my radar until I decided to watch all the 1990s Academy Award Best Picture nominees, and this being one of them. I decided to watch it, and I'm glad that I did, and that's my number 119, which is Secrets and Lies. If you've been sleeping on this film, I highly recommend watching this, especially if you can relate to a dysfunctional family. This does an excellent job of depicting it. It's a very subtle film, but it has a really good directing style in that with each passing act, there's a momentum of tension that really curls us as viewers by the time we reach that third act. It's a very tense experience that you might not necessarily think is, because it's just characters talking, but it's very effective at really embodying these characters in a three-dimensional manner that is very relatable, especially if you can relate to this dysfunctional family. I love it. I think it does a really good job of depicting this, and it's just one of my favorite films of the 1990s, and just as you can tell by this list in general. Highly recommend this film, and that's why I have it as my number 119. Next up, my number 118, we have Heat. Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, incredible. But that's not even just the peak of the cast. There are several cast members that are just as great as these two. But this film is best known for the diner scene, as well as a shootout towards the end of the second act that is just absolutely thrilling. But it's a 2 hour and 50-minute epic crime film that is also a heist film that's really effective and one of the best genre fare that has to offer. Michael Mann's directing here is top notch. I love the ending, and I just think it's one of those films that every couple years I'll be in the mood to rewatch. And it's also a film that's really heavily inspired many films from this genre to come, and it still hasn't been able to be beat. Love Heat. That's why it's on this list. Next up, we have my number 117. This is the film that came out before Heat. It is also a heist film, and that is The Killing. As you can probably tell by this front cover, the design of the robbers was heavily inspired in regards to The Dark Knight. Like, Christopher Nolan clearly saw this film and was heavily inspired by this in Heat. But The Killing is a film that was one of the first utilizations of like nonlinear storytelling, especially in this genre. And I also just have to say, like, what a film in regards to it being 84 minutes long, but it is able to really get us as viewers in the mindset of these characters and really understand where they're coming from, whilst at the same time really being curious how they're going to pull off this heist. It's one of the best, if not the best of the genre, and I do like it slightly more than Heat, although it is kind of a different flavor of the heist genre, but it's one that's nonetheless incredible. Love, love, love The Killing, and it's also a Stanley Kubrick film. Really good directing here. Love this film. So that's my number 117. Next up, my number 116, we have Memories of Murder, a really, really well done film that, honestly, the first time I saw it, I thought it was good, but I'm glad that I gave it a second chance, because on second viewing, I thought it was a masterpiece. Just a really, really well done film, and it's one of the best films to come from South Korea in quite some time. Just an excellent film, and if you've been sleeping on it, highly recommend it. That's my number 116. Next up, my number 115. This is a excellent companion piece to this film, and honestly, I would love to do a doubleheader movie night sometime with Memories of Murder and Zodiac. Yes, Zodiac is an excellent David Fincher film. It's one of those films that I come back to probably once every couple years, and I would come back to it more often, but it's one of those films that you have to be in the right mindset, because it is a film that it's not as rewatchable in my eyes personally as something like Gone Girl, The Social Network, but nonetheless is a masterpiece. Like, I think that Zodiac is an incredible film, and it does a really good job of combining like the newspaper genre with the drama genre, but also a really interesting character study that also is very, very historically accurate. Like, David Fincher was the perfect director for this material, and I think that it is one of the best films of 2007 and just of the 2000s in general. Love Zodiac, and that is why it's my number 115. Next up, my number 114. This is a landmark of the Western genre, and that is The Wild Bunch. So yeah, this really set the tone for what the Western genre would look like from 1969 onwards, and that's one of the reasons why I consider it to be the best, but also the blood squibs in this film are just fantastic. The editing style was also something that was kind of unprecedented for this time period. This was back in a time period where, scenes would take, I think the average length of a scene was like 7-8 seconds, but the average like cut for this film was like something like half a second or 1 second. It was kind of crazy, how short the cuts were. But it's also a film that just is almost like a farewell to the Western genre that, Unforgiven would do several decades later. But The Wild Bunch was just a very effective film that in the now it was saying like, hey, this genre, it's kind of dying out, as well as these, characters. So what are they going to look like, when they're past their heyday? This film does a good job of depicting that. I love The Wild Bunch. One of my favorite Westerns, and that's why I have it as my number 114. Next up, my number 113, we have The New World, the director's cut. I want to preface that because I've only seen the theatrical cut once, which was my first viewing, and my second and third viewing, I saw the director's cut, which is 172 minutes long. I don't know if you can find it online, but I do know that it is on the Criterion Blu-ray, which, by the way, one of the finest Blu-rays I've ever seen. But anyways, The New World is it's an excellent film. Like, it's the perfect film to watch around Thanksgiving time, but it's also a film that you could just put on and just really marvel at the cinematography. Like, it is a feat to behold, and I think that Malick's vision for this film is truly awe-inspiring. It's a thought-provoking film that also is very meditative and philosophical, and I just love it. It's an incredible film, and that's why I have it as my number 113. Next up, my number 112, we have one of the longest titles of the world, and that is The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. Don't let the title fool you. This is an excellent film that even if you know what happens at the end, how it's done is something that is quite the journey. And I think that it's a very meditative Western film that is just really good. One of the best Westerns, especially of the modern age. And I just think that Casey Affleck's performance, Brad Pitt's performance, they are something that are just so, so good. And this film doesn't get talked about enough, but it is a very captivating film, especially if you like, cinematography is one of the most important aspects for filmmaking for you. This is definitely a film to watch because it is just incredible what Roger Deakins is able to pull off. And that's my number 112. Next up, my number 111. Speaking of Roger Deakins, we have Skyfall. So Skyfall, I believe, was Roger Deakins' first endeavor into digital cinematography. It was either this or In Time. But either way, like Skyfall, even though it's shot digitally, what an incredibly great-looking film. Like, this is one of those films that changed my perspective on action filmmaking, how action filmmaking can actually have smooth choreography, how you can actually be able to tell what's going on, and how that's something that, most action filmmakers should try to strive for. Yeah, this is the film that, for me, really actually got me thinking like that. Sam Mendes directing is great, and I just think that it's amazing to see that this is a franchise film, but it doesn't feel like a franchise film. Like, even if you're not necessarily a James Bond kind of person, such as myself, you can still appreciate this film and know that it is a very well put together film that also at the same time gets you thinking. And that's the best kind of blockbusters, in my opinion. Skyfall is one of the best modern day blockbusters in my eyes, and I just think that it's very artfully done. And yeah, that's why I have it on this list at number 111. And now we get to the nitty gritty, final 10 of this list, guys. So my number 110, we have Suspiria, 2018. So this is one of the rare instances of a remake actually being superior than the original. Yes, there I said it. Might be a hot take, but I prefer this far much so than the original. I just think it does a great job of really being able to stand on its own whilst at the same time delivering an artfully done, almost 3-hour-long horror film that at the same time is a very interesting dance film. And it's also a film that is a really good character study, and I absolutely love the makeup. And it's also an interesting Rorschach test of a film, and by that I mean that you can show this film to 10 different people, and 10 different people are going to have 10 way different perspectives on this film, especially with whether they like it or not. And I think that that's an incredible film to be able to have an experience like that where it's everyone's having a different type of experience. I love that. I love Suspiria, and that's my number 110. Next up, my number 109, we have Zero Dark 30. So I actually read the book that this is based on, and I have to say this is a pretty accurate representation of the book. But more importantly, it's a film that I think does a really good job of plunging viewers into the mindset of this lead character and having a tunnel vision type way of going about trying to, come across a terrorist, but at the same time having a really good dissection of this political turmoil for this time period. And it's one of those things where I've heard some people say that this film hasn't aged well, and I would highly disagree. Some people think that it's a pro-torture film. I would disagree with that. Honestly, 100% disagree with it. Years ago, I would have said differently, but here I'm just saying this. I think it's a film that isn't black and white. It's a very gray film, and that's one of the biggest pluses of this film. More importantly, it has one of the most hard-hitting endings, whilst at the same time being quite subtle in its approach. I love Zero Dark 30. Catherine Bigelow 100% should have gotten a Best Director nomination. And yeah, I love this film. And that's why I have it as my number 109. Next up, my number 108, we have You Were Never Really Here. You like Joker? Okay. If you like Joker, guess what? This film came out a couple years before Joker. And in my opinion, it's much better. It is an incredible film. It's like a modern day Taxi Driver, but at the same time has a much different style. Lynn Ramsey, she does such a good job of having this character study be brought in a way that is 100%, not 100%, but probably 80-85% visual storytelling. So a lot of it's put on Joaquin Phoenix and the visuals of the cinematography, and thankfully both are up to the task. It's a very interesting film in regards to that, but it's also a film that I can see might isolate certain viewers. But if you are a viewer that leans more towards art house cinema, this is definitely a film that I would highly recommend. And I have to say, it's one of the rare instances where I saw the film and then the next day I decided to see it again in theaters. And I've seen it, I think, half a dozen times, and it just gets better with each viewing. Joaquin Phoenix did such a great job in this film, and yeah, that's why I've had it as my number 108. Next up, my number 107, this film I've now seen 3 times, and each viewing it gets better and better, and that is The French Connection. This is an incredible film in regards to it really dissecting into the detective lifestyle. More importantly, how it almost has a slice of life lifestyle. That approach is something that really adds to the realism that the director's clearly going for. And I love how New York feels like a living, breathing character, and the gritty cinematography matches that perfectly. It's a film that has some action scenes, and those action scenes are incredibly well done, but it is first and foremost a character study of a gritty type character that definitely is not a typical good guy. Like Popeye Doyle, definitely not a good guy, but he is someone that you can't help but really be intrigued with what's going to happen. And also that ending, perfection. I love The French Connection, and William Friedkin, I have to say, you did such a great job with this film. So that's my number 107. Next up, my number 106. This is a film that when I saw it in theaters, I thought it was good. But I decided to rewatch it a couple years later by picking it up on Blu-ray. And I'm glad that I did, because this is now one of my go-to films to watch on Easter. And that is First Reformed. I loved First Reformed. I think that it's interesting how over the course of time, something can change. Like, this is a film that when I did my 2018, like my top 10 films of 2018, this wasn't even an honorable mention. But it's one of those films that's really climbs the ranking to the point now where it easily would make my top 10 for that year, maybe even top 5. Like, it is that great. I think First Reformed is great, especially if you are someone that is dealing with your faith, or religion, whatever it is that you believe. This is a film that tackles that in a very intriguing way, and I think the environmentalism message of this film also is something that I found to be fascinating. And I just also love how this film plunges us as viewers into the mindset of a character that is someone of faith, for sure, and someone that is a religious figure, but it's someone that, isn't like, oh yeah, I'm perfect, and oh yeah, like, it's very easy to go on this journey. Like, no, it is difficult to be a human, especially, having certain beliefs and everything. Like, it is a difficult journey, and I think that this film does a great job of it. It's one of my favorite religious films, hands down, and it's a film that, if you've ever struggled with faith, I would highly recommend watching this film, because it just is very fascinating. Paul Schrader, man, great director, great writer. So that's my number 106. Next up, my number 105, we have, I know it's quite a recent film, like even more so than like some of these others, but I don't care. I love this film. I've seen it 4 times, and that's Oppenheimer. What an incredible film. What a feat. Christopher Nolan should be commended. This is just truly a fascinating experience. It's like JFK mixed with like the scope of Lawrence of Arabia, mixed with like the dialogue of The Social Network. It's just a film that's combining some of my favorite films of all time. And I just think it's a very effective film with an ending that the first time I saw it really gave me knots in my stomach, and I mean that in the best way possible. It's a film that is just so good, and I think it works on all fronts, and that's why I have it as my number 105. Next up, my number 104. This is a film that the first time I saw it, I thought it was really good, but it took me a second viewing, I would say, when I saw it in theaters, for it to really be cemented as like, oh wow, that was incredible. And that is my number 104, The Lighthouse. Yes, I absolutely adore this film. I think it's just a moody, atmospheric, well-done film of 2 individuals going crazy. It's a slice-of-life approach for sure, but the build-up to that third act is really something. I think that the symbolism of this film is on point. It's just a very well-done film, and if you are someone that, isn't necessarily a big fan of, like, art house cinema, I would probably avoid it, but if you are someone that likes art house horror films, highly recommend this film. It is one of the best of the genre, and that's why it's my number 104. Next up, my number 103. Honestly, it's very difficult to choose which was my favorite film of 2019. Like, at first I was like Parasite. Parasite, but then I sometimes go back and forth and say like, oh, The Lighthouse. But I'm still sticking with Parasite, which is why Parasite is my number 103. Yeah, there's a reason why it won Best Picture. I think it's a fantastic film. I'm glad that it won Best Picture. And more importantly, I just think it's a very fascinating film. And I think that it's incredible with what that ending really hits home. More importantly, the character study of this family is something that I love, and I just think it's a film that keeps on giving. So Parasite and Lighthouse, they're like neck and neck, but I think I'm giving Parasite a slight lead, which is why it is my number 103. Next up, my number 102. This is a film that I'll never forget the first time I saw this, which was at like 2 a.m. In early 2014, and I've come back to it multiple times since then, and throughout my life, it's just a film that seems to get better and better, and that is my number 102, Her. What can I say? I love Joaquin Phoenix. I think he's one of the finest actors working today, maybe ever, and I just think his performance here was just so good. But I just absolutely love Spike Jonze's sensitive directing and writing, and I just think that ending hits hard every time, and each viewing it seems to hit harder. Like, I remember last time I saw it, I was actually crying by the end. Like, it's just a very effective film. Like, it is really good, and I also love that it's a companion piece to Lost in Translation. Like, Lost in Translation is, for those who don't know, Sofia Coppola and Spike Jonze were actually married. Lost in Translation is like from her perspective of their marriage, and then Her is Spike Jonze's perspective of their marriage. So it's very interesting to see these two and their perspectives on their marriage. And then what's also great is that Scarlett Johansson is technically in both. So I love Her. I think it's an incredible film. And that's why I have it as my number 102. Next up, my number 101. This is a film that was so close to making my top 100 favorite films of all time. It was so close. And I actually rewatched it recently, and I finally gave it a 5 out of 5. My number 101, we have Road to Perdition. This is an excellent film. It is very moody. It is featuring one of, if not Tom Hanks' best performances. Thomas Newman delivers one of his best scores of all time. The cinematography by Conrad Hall is also just perfection. The rain sequence at the end, you know what I'm talking about. It's awesome. The ending is also just so poignant, and I just think it's so effective at the same time. Just an overall really well done film that at the same time serves as an example of the gangster genre really being meditative, which, as some of you might know, those are my favorite gangster entries, and this is definitely one of those. So I love this film, and also American Beauty is one of, if not my favorite films of all time. So the fact that this was Sam Mendes' follow-up film and he was able to just make a film that almost reached that level is pretty impressive. So I love Road to Perdition, and that's why it's my number 101. But hey guys, that's my top 101 to 150. Let me know your top 101 to 150 favorite films of all time, or favorite 25, favorite 50, favorite 100. Just let me know in the comment section down below. And also be sure to watch the rest of these videos that's part of this series. And yeah, I really appreciate the journey, guys. And if you haven't done so already, don't forget the subscription, notification bell, follow me on Letterboxd, Patreon, and I will catch you guys later.